Thank you, everybody, for attending. I appreciate the opportunity to share the next hour with you. We are promising to have a lively conversation, which is always comical because Matt, Diana, Dennis, and myself typically huddle, somewhere along the week and have a conversation of, well, what do you want to talk about? Like, gosh, I don't know. We haven't had a lot of changes. And then within the last 72 hours, it seems like there's just been a barrage of information that's come towards us. So we appreciate that. Diana is going to kick it off and just do some quick HR updates, which is going to be on Family First, Social Security. We have a special guest today, David from Paylocity, because we thought it would be a nice opportunity to kind of get the Social Security executive order deferral options from a payroll company's perspective to see what they've been experiencing as well. And then Matt will be sharing with us a litany of information. I will let you know that we don't have a lot of slides on him, so we can showcase him. And the reason is because I think yesterday at this time, Matt was on a beach sunning himself and just drove in, I think last night, if I remember correctly.
That is correct. So I'm super fresh. Yeah.
And as the conversation goes, certainly send emails, info@Arcwood for questions. I've got that open and populated. Certainly the chat box is going to be up and running and populated. So any means that you feel comfortable submitting a question to us, certainly feel free to do so. And then probably just my last course is to make sure I read our disclosure. For all of you compliance nuts out there like ourselves. So just for quick disclosure, Arcwood Financial LLC, Arcwood Benefits Consulting Inc., and Arcwood HR LLC, as you guys know us as Arcwood. We are all independent companies of which we do not offer legal or tax advice. Our goal is to provide information to you for assisting in making the decisions at your company with your leadership teams. But we will leave the legal and the tax work up to those professionals, which is why we such enjoy having the relationship with Wellman as well as with Dennis Hall. So with this, I think, Diana, I will turn it over to you and we can explore any changes that we've had from your aspect.
Because there's been no changes whatsoever, none ever, no. So,
and I put Dennis on this screen too, so
just in case,
if Dennis signs in,
on,
we can loop him in as well.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, it's been an interesting 72 hours because that's basically when a lot of this stuff has kind of come through and questions have come in with regards to some of these things and trying to make sure that we have everything covered the way we need to have it covered. So first we're going to go over some updates to the FFCRA, which is the Paid Sick Leave and the Paid Family Medical Leave Act that was effective on April 1st. So if I can have my first slide. So the DOL recently has added 3 additional new questions to their FAQs. And all of this is in regards to now that school is either in session or looking to go into session soon, depending on where we're at in the country. They have provided employees and employers some additional language around how to manage the FFCRA leave for this. So question 98 is about a child attending school on a hybrid or an alternating school schedule. And employees are eligible to take the paid FFCRA leave. And this is both the sick leave, because the first 2 weeks of the 12-week medical family leave is covered under that time, and or the 12 weeks of paid leave is all under this. So they are eligible to take the time off for those days that their child is not in school, and they either have to be on remote learning, or if they are allowed to go to, they're in the school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but they have to be home on Tuesday, Thursdays. An employee can take those Tuesday, Thursdays off if they need to be able to care for the child if there's no one else available to take care of their child. But if a parent chooses, if the school gives you a choice of we're going to in-person learning 5 days a week, and a parent chooses to continue the remote learning, then they are not eligible for the paid leave, because the reasons under FFCRA is only if the school is closed or the child care facility is closed. That is why an employee would be eligible. So under question 99 on the FAQs, that's you're not allowed to make that choice on your own. It's only if the school is making that choice for you if they are closed or not. And then the next slide shows question 100, which is about school is starting under a remote learning program and will continue to evaluate depending on local circumstances to determine when our in-person learning will start. Am I eligible? And yes, that again shows that the school is closed. Once the school is determined, like here in Arizona, I believe a lot of kids are going back in person this week, that we've met our numbers. And so we were in remote learning before, so they were eligible for it then. And now this week when kids are going to school in person, then they would not be eligible beyond that to take the FFCRA leave. But with the note under that and with the guidelines and the information that we're seeing is that while an employee may not be eligible for the FFCRA leave, you know, if a school is technically opened or if there's in-person working, an employer should maybe look at, and this is where that whole, you know, consideration and making sure that we're taking care of our employees. Let's figure out, is there a different way? Are there other options for an employee during this time? Because, you know, a cost of a replacing employee can be anywhere between 20 and 200% of a yearly salary of that employee. So are there ways that we can do a flexible schedule, figure out a job sharing program or a split schedules where they work in the morning, they take their afternoon off and then work in the evenings? Is there ways that we can manage the schedule so that an employee can take care of their job and then also take care of their children during all of this crazy remote learning and time of all of us trying to figure that out? I've seen pictures of parents posting of their, kids just flopping down because they're just so tired of doing remote learning and they don't want to do it anymore. Or, PE class through a Zoom just doesn't seem to be the same. So let's find ways to be flexible and considerate for our employees with regards to this time and taking time off.
Diana, do you have, so we have direct clients that are using these flexible work schedules and these hours. Are they being successful with it? Are they finding that there's additional challenges just from a leadership perspective as far as, making sure everyone's on track of what's happening and controlling the workflows? I
haven't seen anyone specifically, though I know even in my own personal case with Cass, we've done a flexible kind of schedule where, she's based on what's going on. She may need to go in the afternoons and deal with childcare and manage that. And then she gets back on in the evenings after the kids have gone to bed. So you find ways and you work with your employees directly in making it work. Because I know that at least we've been able to in our situation make it work.
Great. Thank you.
Next slide. So back in early August and before, there was a court case against the DOL in the state of New York, and the court gave its decision on August 3rd, and on late Friday, the DOL made some revisions to their FAQs in conjunction with those decisions, and they have chosen to take the decisions by the court and rework the FAQs to fall in line with most of what the court said. And there were 4 major areas that were tied to that lawsuit, and they have made it nationwide compliance. So they're not just doing this for the state of New York, which some thought might be the case. So the first one was regarding being able to use the FFCRA leave only if there was work available. And so the court said, you know, if they're an employee, doesn't matter if there was work or not. This is the one that the DOL said, well, no, that's not how the regulations were actually, the law was actually written. So they are sticking to their guns on this one with regards to that FFCRA leave is only available if the employer has work for the employee. So if an employee has been laid off or furloughed or a business closed, then the employee is not eligible for FFCRA, but they may be eligible for unemployment benefits. And so that's how they took that designation and how they see the separation on those two. The next big one was about intermittent leave. And the court said you can't, you know, an employee should be allowed to take time off intermittently, but if it's in a full day access only. So, and only if it's for childcare and if it's only for worksite work. So if someone is telecommuting and they want to do an intermittent work day because they are sick or they're caring for someone, but they can work a couple of hours but need a couple of hours off, if the employer agrees, then that's allowed. If it's for a full day, so like our hybrid schedule, school is in session Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then the employee is allowed to take their FFCRA leave on that Tuesday, Thursdays when their child is not in school, and that is allowed. They don't have to get an employer's approval because that's not considered intermittent. So it's only that partial day leave that is now considered intermittent. And it's only for those employees that are working on site, not just the telecommuting. And it's only, intermittent is only covered under the child care. So if someone is sick and they're a worksite employee, there is no intermittent leave allowed. The third piece of the court case was about the healthcare provider definition. Initially, the DOL said it didn't matter what role you had in a hospital or a school or location that was considered a healthcare facility, everyone was exempt. The court case said, no, that's not the way this should be working. Employees that are not, so a healthcare provider is only those that are providing diagnostic, preventative, treatment, or other services that are integrated with and necessary to the provisions of patient care. So the front desk clerk is not considered a healthcare provider, and so they are eligible for the FFCRA. The doctor in the office is not eligible for the FFCRA under the new guidelines and provisions. And then the last piece on this was the clarification on the information required from an employee. So the way the DOL originally had written this was that an employee had to provide all of the documentation requested from the employer before the leave could be approved. The court case said, nope, they may not be able to give you that information, so they have to be able to provide it as soon as practical. So if they can't provide the information before the leave is actually needed, we are, as employers, required to give them that time to get us that information. Now, it's not forever. There is some guidelines within the FAQs that it has to be within a day or two after they start their leave. So if they're sick, a day or two after, they have to be able to provide you with the information. But they also, at the end of the DOL FAQs, they say, again, encouraging the collaboration between the employee and the employer of making sure that employees are able to take their leave when they can, they're not coming in sick. So working with your employees, both not just for caring for themselves or others if they're sick, but also through the childcare stuff. So continuing to work with our employees through all of this process. But then the fun came up. So this came up, I was reading an article, and so under the FFCRA, individuals are given the 80 hours of FFCRA paid sick leave to use between April 1st and December 31st. And those 80 hours are tied to an individual, not to the employer. So if I am an employee and I work at company XYZ and I took my 80 hours of sick in April and I have now quit and I am now going to go work for the Acme company, I am not eligible for an additional 80 hours of FFCRA leave just because I'm at a new employer. I've used and exhausted my whole time. So how are employers supposed to manage this? Good question. And this has been a flurry of discussion, as Pete can help me attest to today,
Yes.
in trying to figure out how to manage this situation, because we're guessing a couple of things came up over the weekend with regards to this, and today, that this is going to be a new thing probably as employers are starting to open back up. Employees may have gone and worked somewhere else. Now they're working, that business is closed. They're going to go work somewhere else. And how to manage through this. There is, at least from what I've been able to find, nothing in the IRS or the DOL guidelines that talk to this specifically. So there's a couple things that employers should be doing to help protect themselves. One is make sure that we're documenting the requests that we are receiving from our employers. That we're keeping the information, the requests that we're getting from our employees, that we either are having them fill out a document or that we're keeping a spreadsheet of all of the employees that have taken leave and the reasons why. But as new employees come in, it's been recommended that we have an employee sign a document that states that asks and states that they have or have not used their 80 hours of FFCRA paid sick leave. And if they have, they understand that they're not eligible. And if they lie, there could be consequences up to and including termination for lying around their usage. Pete, you want to jump in?
Well, I think it's, so there's obviously volumes of information here. And so really kind of taking a step back, what we're talking about is that when the 80 hours are being funded, is being funded by a payroll tax credit. So from an employer's perspective, when I'm accepting the 80 hours that are going out to to the participants or the employees that are requesting this, then I'm certainly going to be requesting that on my 941s, which are the quarterly ones, if I remember correctly. I got a payroll guy and an HR person on the phone, so I can probably get that clarified if I need to. However, as an employer, how do I know if that new hire that I hired maybe when I'm reopening in September, have they already taken that 80 hours? If they have, and I don't know about that, then what's at risk is my credit, because I could potentially get a notice from the service saying that that individual, when they're reconciling Social Security numbers, has already received that 80 hours from a prior employer. So therefore, I'm going to be denied that credit. And if you kind of think how, going back to everything that has kind of domino effect from this national emergency to the point where we don't, we have a coin shortage because of the furloughs at the Treasury, and we've got, meat shortages, and there's all sorts of shortages that are obviously happening. Well, the IRS is experiencing the same thing. So when we're submitting these quarterly reports, when are they going to reconcile that? I mean, it could be 24 months down the line before we get a credit back. And depending upon the size of the employer, a large employer can say, okay, well, we can absorb that. But from a smaller employer perspective, that could be, detrimental to the cash flow. And so we made some phone calls this morning to some attorneys, and they really asked the question is, we have some concerns about privacy. What are some of the latitude that we can be granted so that when we're interviewing somebody, especially that's coming on mid-year, what is our protocol? Can we have them sign off on something? And the answer was yes, you may. Because, if you're thinking about the spirit of the legislation and also in the spirit of helping employers, because remember, a lot of the stuff that's happened through the CARES Act has been trying to get money into the employees, but through the avenue of the employer. They need us as, kind of a conduit system. So they're creating systems around that. But yes, we may ask new hires, have you received any hours, and have them document and sign off on it. Purely to, protect us from, making sure that we have the appropriate credits that we can expect through Social Security. Fair? Is that a good summary?
Yes. It's been a lot of information to digest very quickly. And so but it was something that came up on our radar this weekend, and we wanted to make sure that employers were at least, and our clients were aware to
Right.
start thinking about this. We just don't know what the risk is at this point. So we each have to make that determination.
Right, especially with a reopen versus potentially another close, more furlough. We could live exactly what we lived to the second quarter. We could experience that again in the fourth quarter. We don't have that information to make these decisions. And anybody that's had a conversation with me, I'm always,
I'll take a couple.
constantly banging the drum to make sure that
I'll walk over there. Okay.
hang on. That we're constantly, I just mute everybody. So Diana, if you want to say anything, you got to come back on.
Got it.
So I was saying, we're always hammering on the fact that we have to have information to make decisions. And it's hard to make these decisions without having this information readily available. So I think it's prudent for us as employers, if we're bringing people on within the next, 4 months, 3 months left of the year, that this is something that is fair to ask, just to make sure that we're protecting ourselves as an employer as well as the employee.
Correct. And I just got a question with regards to the calculation of the 80 hours. And so an employee could be working multiple part-time jobs, and so they could be also getting 20 hours at company A and 20 hours at company B and 20 hours at company C, and then 20 hours somewhere else, but they still can only have up to the 80 hours. So we may only, as an employer, be responsible for 20 of that 80 if they're a part-time employee, but we still have to take that into account, because they could be full-time somewhere else and working 80 hours in one location and 20 hours a week somewhere else, and could still overhit that 80 hours. And so it's this gray area of the rules, and the laws didn't give us anything on how to manage this. And so it's one of these gray areas that we'll continue to probably run into as we go through this process.
Yeah, well, it's going to take
figure out how to manage it.
Yeah, it's going to take employers sitting down with pen and paper and mapping it out. If they know that they have employees that are working at multiple organizations and subject to the hours, and so there's definitely could potentially be some work involved, unfortunately. So you want to go on to the next exciting topic?
Let's go on to the next exciting topic, which is the Social Security deferral. So that went into effect. So on August 8th, our president signed Executive Order Notice 2020-65, saying that employers could defer, or employees could defer the 6.2% Social Security tax on their checks starting on September 1st through the end of the year. And all employees that had a biweekly compensation of less than $4,000 were eligible to participate. However, the deferrals will have to be paid back. So while employees may see a bump in their checks through the end of the year, they would have a lower check starting at the beginning of the new year to pay those deferrals back. So this was signed on August 8th, the Treasury and IRS finally gave us some guidelines on August 28th, like the day before, late Friday, before this was eligible and starting to go. So employers and payroll companies have been scrambling to try to figure out how to make this work. And one of the things that the guidance gave us was that the deferral was not mandatory. So employers didn't have to participate in this. An employer can choose to either opt in or opt out. An employee cannot force the employer to comply with this because they want to participate. But if an employer does choose to opt into this program, an employee does have the option to opt out and not participate in the deferral. But some of the kind of open questions with all of this is, one, will the government make a decision to waive the payback of the deferral? We don't know that yet. We probably won't know until after the election, even potentially. And an employer will probably be liable, or they will be liable, if they choose to opt in, they have an employee, they defer the taxes, and that employee leaves the company, then the employer would be liable. Now the employer could potentially go after that employee to get money back to pay for it. So I don't know if employers will want to take that employee to collections or go through that process to get that money back. So while it initially doesn't cost the employer anything to do this, it could in the long run, depending on what happens.
Well, that's probably a good question for David too, and just kind of how their systems have been set up. Because David, you're up and running, or I should say Paylocity is up and running as far as managing this, and the employers can log in and set this up if they so choose. Are there any considerations from your perspective as far as, if somebody quits, possibly capturing it from the last check, kind of how you double up on insurance premiums or other things? Or like what was inside your systems calculations?
Yeah, so absolutely, the employer is on the hook should they opt in and should that employee opt in. And you really have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. I mean, you have to look at your turnover ratio and who could potentially take part in this. And if, worst case scenario, if those people were to leave the organization, how are you going to get that money back? And you kind of hit the nail on the head with the doubling up on the premium, because by the way, the $4,000 is assuming a biweekly compensation. So if you are semi-monthly or something like that, just assume like the same sort of hour per dollar attribution for that $4,000. And yeah, that the employers really have to look at, maybe it makes sense for that engineering firm that has I know a personal friend of mine is a computer engineer, had to lower their salary for the remainder of this year. So maybe it would make sense to double up on his premium at the beginning of 2021, because 9/1 through 12/31, that's probably, from a payroll perspective, an equal number of pay periods or close to than it would be on the repay of those deposits. But they do have to. The one thing we do know is they do have to be divvied up. It doesn't have to absolutely be equal, but it cannot be one lump sum on the repayment of those. And if there are any wages, let's see, I could show you my screen, Pete, if that's okay. To share.
You can.
I don't know if it would interrupt the reporting.
No, it's all part of it. Do I have to give you permission to do that? Because that might make our decision for us on whether or not I have the capability of sharing.
Let me try it. Oh, you actually have disabled screen sharing. I cannot. So no worries. There's actually a site, or there's a section on our website that has all of the new press releases, and it actually has what's called micro kits within Paylocity. So if you're a client, where these reports live, how you calculate this in the payroll system, what those earnings and deduction codes look like. So I'm happy to follow up with the guest list to some links. You don't have to necessarily be a client too. A lot of the deduction codes are coded on a generic basis for IRS specs and things like that.
Okay.
I forget what the last part was. So are we set up to calculate them?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I got a
I-
question that came in on
Go
the
ahead.
calculation. So it's up to $4,000 biweekly is how it's kind of written out. So is that, let me clarify my question, because I have a question, but I'm having trouble reformatting the question. So if I make $4,001, am I forfeiting the entire, am I disqualified from that? Or am I waiving the payroll taxes up to the 4,000?
So it's,
No,
if
you're disqualified, I
you're
believe.
disqualified for that
1,000.
payroll, from what I understand though,
Okay. But
is that it's
so
only
then
for that week that you're above. So if an employee, say they got a bonus in one payroll that took them over that 4,000 in a biweekly period, then they would
Right.
be ineligible on that pay period. But if the next pay period they're only at 2,000, then they would be again eligible to participate.
Okay.
It's not across
If
the
that's fair.
board. It's per payroll.
And I'm assuming the payroll systems, David, are tracking this. Your software systems are able to have that flexibility to turn on, turn off, run reporting on it, have it segregated so we know what we're doing on the repayment side.
Yes.
Because that was
Yep,
a comical conversation we had about 4 weeks ago with Matt. Because we're like, how? I mean, it's one thing to change your income taxes, right? Because in your deferrals, and so your systems already did that. But payroll taxes have been pretty well hard coded for how many years? And so just trying to figure out how the systems, across the United States, we're going to have to retool to accommodate that. So,
And I've been really impressed with our product development team. Not all payroll companies have caught up to speed, but as I look at our, we call them micro kits within Paylocity, and this is just on our public site, but they have sections for each little new update and how you track this and how it's calculated, who's eligible, who's not, and you can do filters within a payroll batch to identify those individuals.
So I
that
know
opt in.
I have one more question for you. Then we're about 4 minutes faster or slower than I wanted to be at, just because I do have some content with Matt. But the burning question, I know the answer for us, but are you aware of any Paylocity client that's actually taking advantage of this deferral?
So we just, like Diana said, we just got the actual guidance, on the 28th. So I personally have not heard of my clients, but we haven't really had any client-facing meetings personally, or on-demand webinars. So I don't really have a good gauge on whether or not clients are taking this. Almost every one of my clients has a PPP, and we're even with moving a client from a provider, we're doing all that tracking and just automatically assuming that we need to get wages, all the way to 2019. But I don't know the percentage that are actually electing for this deferral.
Because I know from our clientele, we don't have one that I've learned that
Nope.
is going to be doing it, have actually made a decision not to do it.
Yeah.
And we're looking at different communication pieces just to make sure that they're communicating with the participant, or I keep on saying the word participants, employees. So the employees are kind of aware of what's going on. And then if anybody read some of the journal reports that came out last weekend, clearly there's not one large organization out there that has decided to take advantage of this executive order because they feel it's going to be much too complicated. And then it's also weighing, is it more pleasurable to have a skipped tax right now, or more painful to have a double up on the taxation in the future if we're not going to have the waiver on it? And I think clearly everybody's kind of been weighing that it's more painful to double up in the future with it. But Matt, do you guys have any clients that have taken advantage of this?
No, we haven't, and we have been recommending really the same as opting out, really because, I mean, there's a business risk, right? As you guys alluded to, the company is on the hook for those payroll taxes if the employee should leave. And it's not waived. So that's really the business risk. Someone has to make the business decision: is will you have unhappy employees if you opt out and then it's waived, then basically people who opted in got $2,000 roughly free, and others who didn't get that. So that's a business decision.
Kind of goes back to our, conversation is how do you make decisions without really all the information that's available, and not available. Actually, we are making decisions with the information that's available. That's a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how we could be put in a position to, have somebody mad at us.
Yeah.
But
And
I agree with your statement. It's a conversation that leadership has to have internally to see what they prefer to have at their organization.
Yeah, because the only organization that I've heard so far that is doing it is the U.S. government.
Right.
So.
All right. So Matt, welcome back.
Thank you. You
look tan.
Yeah. I will add that I was put towards the back of the agenda. I think it was quote because what I am going to talk about is going to make people's brains hurt. What the heck was the first half of this, right? I mean, no offense there, but man, that stuff is painful thinking about. So
you know what?
Yeah.
For 100% full disclosure, Matt, you are correct. I was trying to figure out where the emotional level of everybody would have been after listening to what we're about to tell them. And I didn't want to have that before or after Diane and David. So you are correct. I don't know if it was a short straw or a long straw. However, welcome back, and we do like to tease you because it does seem that you're out of town often. Although actually I do digress, because one of the times you were out of town, that's when you were doing a bike ride down the circumference, I think, of the United States or Canada or something like that. But
something along those lines.
You do relax, and you're actually on the beach as well. But
South America to North America, or I don't know, something like that. It was something along those lines. So
let's transition into the next section, just because I know that we do have some updates that we want to go through for the PPPFA. That's a mouthful.
Yes, it is. That's part of it. I will say, in general, banks are still kind of reluctant to take applications. And I will tell you, banks are all over the board. And so PPP borrowers will probably be receiving a variety of notices from their banks as to when they'll start taking applications, how they're going to interpret certain things, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I'm getting these from my clients who we're helping prepare their applications, and they're just getting, communications constantly, and they're vastly different bank by bank. So what I'm about to say is you have to take a little bit with a grain of salt, because there's the federal guidance, but then there's actually how the banks are interpreting certain things. Does that make sense, Pete?
It does, because I too am getting those emails. And they're like, any day now, be prepared. We've created a 5-step program, and step 1 is gather information. And step 2 is be prepared to answer these questions. And step 3 is determine if you're short form or long form. And, they are definitely communicating with us. But clearly they're not ready either.
And I think some banks are clearly waiting for Congress to act, because if you guys remember in one of our conversations, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, when you and I boldly predicted that the CARES Act 4 or 5 dot whatever was going to be
supposed
passed.
to be inked like a month ago.
That was supposed to be inked, and we were going to look like superstars, and now we just look like schmucks.
Clairvoyant superstars, I mind you.
Right, clairvoyant, yeah. But like if the forgiveness, the automatic forgiveness feature of loans under $150,000 is going to take care of something like 84 or 87% of all PPP loans out there. So think about if you take that kind of volume off of the table, it's significant. So I think some banks are still holding out hope that there's going to be some action, but there is no action right now. At least I hear there's some discussion, but I don't think there's anything, at least from my sources, anything concrete that we can hang our hat on, enough for me to recommend to you to make a projection as to when this is going to be signed. So
I've learned my lesson with that.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about what some things to consider. Again, your bank may or may not be taking anything yet, but there is certainly some information out there. And that is, let's talk about the first one, which is the forgiveness form. There's actually 2 different SBA approved forgiveness forms. There's the easy form and the long form. And the long form came out first, and then the easy form came out. And by and large, the best way to go is the easy form if you qualify. And what it is, the easy form, it's really self-explanatory. It's easy to complete. It has about 5 or 6 lines asking for some financial information like your payroll, your rent, and some of those things. And you don't have to get down into a long, detailed FTE calculation and listing out all of your employees and that type of thing. So if you can qualify for the EZ form, do it. So that's the first place you're going to go. So you alluded to, you've seen some of these banks sending out, do you do the calculation or do the analysis if you qualify for the EZ form? There's really 2 criteria that you need to worry about. One is, and you meet one or the other. You don't need to meet both of them. And the first end is if you could not operate between February 15th and the end of your covered period at your normal operating levels due to compliance with HHS guidance issued between March 1st and the end of 2020, then you can qualify to use the EZ form. So great example here in Arizona, the gyms, I think everywhere, the gyms, movie theaters, restaurants that had indoor seating, they were shut down. And so if you were in one of those situations, you qualify for the EZ form. The other one, which if you did not have that situation, the other criteria that you could meet is you didn't reduce the number of employees or the average hours paid between January 1st of 20 and the end of your covered period. And so you have to do a little calculation and Paylocity reports. I've used Paylocity reports. We use Paylocity, so a little plug for Paylocity. They've done a very good job. And you can basically take that information off of the reports and do your calculations. And if you meet those criteria, use the EZ form. So that's the first and foremost. Do you have any questions on the EZ form? Okay. So go there first.
Nothing that has come through. I don't see anything in the chat. Let me check the emails real quick, actually. I tell you, it takes a village. I've got Lisa in the background.
Thanks for the shameless plug there, Matt.
You are very welcome.
What about the 25% salary reduction?
Help me out again there.
So there, on the EZ form, I thought that if you had reduced salaries by 25%, you weren't allowed to use the EZ form.
I believe, I need to go back. That might be one of the safe harbors. I need to go back and check that. In fact, I can pull it up while we're sitting here. I have the form because I paraphrased off of there, but it's if you did not reduce your number of employees or average hours paid. There was something in the PPPFA with the 25%, but I'll get clarification on that for you.
So I can here. Are you looking at the application?
I can pull it up right here.
I'm going to switch screens. Is this what you're looking at? So you either.
So that's. I don't think that's the EZ form. I think you're on. Oh, yep. That's a new
checklist for using the SBA form 3508EZ. It's on the Treasury's website, and here I'll put a link in the chat.
I think you have to. Pete, I think you have to. One of the points is you cannot reduce annual salary or hourly wages. By more than 25%. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I just put what I'm looking at right here. I just put into the chat. So anybody on the call can certainly pull up this PDF. But it does give us the definitions and the checklist for using the EZ form.
Yes. That's interesting.
If I were to not reduce annual salary or hourly wages of any employee by more than 25% during the covered period or the alternative payroll covered period is defined below, compared to the period between January 1, 2020 and March 31 of 2020.
You are correct. That's check. Yeah, that's number 3 actually on the face of the EZ form. So that is correct.
Yep.
So yeah, more than 25% would not be eligible for the EZ form.
Correct.
So definitely go check everything, just what Pete brought up, as well as all those are right on the face of the easy form. It's on page 2 of the easy form. It basically, you have to attest to each one of those things that Pete is bringing up right there. And so basically go through that. If you don't qualify for that, then you have to go to the long form. And the long form requires you to, obviously, it's longer in that it requires a lot more data, and you have to list out your employees and the FTEs. It's kind of again, it's a lot more complex. But what I have found is in all of these loan forgiveness applications, the FTE is where people are going to get tripped up on. And so I will also say that I have looked at many payroll reports that list FTEs, and there are errors on them. And so don't take them verbatim. And I'll give you an example. One of our clients has people that are employees that are listed as commission-based, but they were still paying them, but they list them as like a 0.1 or a 0.01 FTE, when really they're a full FTE. It's just that how they're paid is differently. So their FTE report was showing dramatically fewer FTEs than they really had. And so we had to go back and make adjustments to that. And that's just, and it's not the payroll company's fault. That's how the company put that employee in there. So it's not again, I don't want to blame the payroll companies and Paylocity. It wasn't you. So that, I'll say that.
Yeah. That's pretty common too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There you go. But also on the FTE though, you also have a buy if you terminate somebody for cause. So then I guess, Diana, what are the requirements? You just have to just make sure you have the reporting or the documentation of the termination for cause, because this is, you're having a conversation with your bank, right? I mean, this is with your banker that hopefully you've got a relationship, and so you can have that conversation so that they know that you're off by one. With a 10-person employee, that's 10% of the forgiveness.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's having you have to have the documentation and make sure that you're keeping it. If it's either a termination for cause or you offered the job back to somebody and they refused, then that can also count towards that that calculation and that forgiveness of the safe harbor. So.
And that's a real challenge for especially some of these restaurant and chains and let's say in the service industry, where the unemployment benefit was greater than the wages that they were making. And so there were people that were leaving or refusing to basically work because they were getting more on unemployment that they were employed. So I agree with you, Diana. It's getting documentation of that you've offered and tried to hire these people. So.
Right. Yep. And now the third bullet.
Yeah.
Recent
so
interim final rule.
Yeah. But real quick before I leave that, so definitely check the FTE safe harbors on the long form. There's a long calculation. The first one is identical in the easy form. I think I like that because the easy form came out afterwards. So if you can fall under the safe harbor on the long form for FTE reduction, just use the easy form because you'll qualify anyways. But it's really the second one, and it uses your FTE count at certain target dates throughout the pandemic. I won't bore you with all the details because it's a long calculation, but just know if you can get that safe harbor, FTE safe harbor number 2, that is a much, much better way to go than to try and go do a long calculation. And it'll save you from any kind of a reduction in forgiveness due to FTE. So just look at safe harbor number 2.
Okay.
Now your favorite subject. So
well, I don't know. I'm not going to classify it as my favorite subject. However, sir, I turn the stage to you.
So this one again kind of came out of the blue in the middle of the night, it seemed like. And at first it's like, okay, well, I guess that could be okay. And then I started having clients present me with their real data. I'm like, oh, this is a real problem. So let's say that there's the business A obtained a PPP loan. And as we all remember, PPP loans can be used for payroll as well as rent and utilities. Now, let's say that business A is renting space from a related party, and it could even be the owner of business A, or it could be, a related party or a relative of business A. Now, let's call it building B. So building B charges business A rent. On the surface, I'm like, okay, that they were allowing that. In the very beginning, they were allowing 100% the rent to be included in the forgiveness application at 100%. Well, what the interim final rule that came out on August 24th said was you can, the business A can only include in their rent calculation on the forgiveness app what building B paid in mortgage interest if they have a mortgage on that particular building. So building B has a mortgage and they pay principal and interest payments, and now building B owner can only pass through the interest that was paid on a monthly basis over to business A to include on their application. So right away, you now have less rent expense than what you thought you were going to have on your loan forgiveness application, because that payment is basically taking, your rent payment is paying for principal and interest, and now you only have interest. And it depends on where building B owner is on their loan amortization schedule. If they're very late into that amortization schedule, then there's a lot less interest than if they were early on in that.
Right.
Are you with me so far?
I am. So
Okay.
I'll repeat it back just because that's what I do. I learned that from Brandon. Okay, so Pete owns Arcwood. Pete owns, I'll say, SunWest Real Estate. I'm trying to come up with two different names. So because Arcwood is paying rent to SunWest Real Estate, which I also own, I now can only deduct the interest portion of my rent payment that was going from Arcwood to SunWest Real Estate.
That is correct. And I'm not going to use it. I'm going to change the term instead of deduct. I mean, can change it to,
Or,
that's it.
yeah.
You can only claim that on your loan forgiveness application. Correct.
Okay.
So,
and if I own multiple companies, so let's say I have multiple companies that are paying rent and multiple PPP loans, and I'm prorating all the interest for each one of those PPP loans if there's multiple companies involved to the same landlord.
You have to allocate it somehow to those businesses, correct?
Okay. And what is the aggregation rule for ownership? So when you say a related entity, is that defined like 414 is related, and for retirement, I'm sorry for jargon, is that related like a retirement plan where common ownership is say 80%? Is that considered one or related, or?
You know, they, I haven't gone that deep into it. I think it's 100%, although, well, 100% seems like a pretty large threshold. I don't think it was that clear. And I think they were really intending for it to be like 100%, because that's a lot of these people do this, or if the partnership that owns the business also owns the building. So it might be, yeah. So I think that's what they're intending. But let me, before we leave that point of kind of that interest, if you as a building owner don't have a mortgage on that particular building, then your rent, you're claiming your rent goes away completely. Make sense?
Okay.
Because
if SunWest Real Estate did not have a mortgage, just owned it outright, Arcwood cannot take any of that rent payment towards their forgiveness application.
Correct.
Because of the related entity. This is only for related entities between operating entity and real estate entity.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, let me throw another little snafu at you. And this one, I don't think they thought about. Maybe they did. I just don't know. But in the original CARES Act,
there's a lot that they did not think through in advance. So
right, exactly. Yeah. So in the original CARES Act, the SBA was given authority to make SBA loan payments to the lending institutions, right? They're back, SBA back, on behalf of the borrower. And so I have at least more than one client that has an SBA loan on their building, and the SBA went ahead and made those mortgage payments, on their building, but on their business, they were wanting to take that rent into their loan forgiveness application. And now, because those are true payments, not deferral of payments, interest is not accruing on that because those payments are like a normal monthly mortgage payment. Now they do not have any rent to claim on their business because the SBA has made the payment on their behalf.
For them, because there was not a deferral.
Correct. If it's a deferral, a mortgage company might defer, but if it's just added on to the end, it's like, okay, you have a 30-year mortgage and you're at year 25 and they're going to defer 6 months. You know, basically they're just going to add 6 months on to the end of your 30-year mortgage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then me personally, and again, it's not in the guidance, but me personally say, hey, there's interest still accruing on that loan that you're responsible for. I would put that in that loan application.
Okay.
Or loan forgiveness application.
But as a follow-up, we'll try to define best we can from their rules what defines a related entity as far as multiple ownership.
Yep, we will do that. That's an action item. So
cool.
The last one, and I just bring this up is because this I saw I saw people borrowers getting noticed on this. If you remember the PPPFA, so that's the PPP Flexibility Act of June 5th of this year, which was really big. That was the one that changed the covered period to from 8 weeks to a potential of 24 weeks. It went from it went to 60-40 split now on payroll and other related expenses. So it was pretty big what they did, but they could only do it for loans made after June 5th because you couldn't go back because those loan documents are already signed by all the borrowers and the banks had already had those loan docs out. Well, the bank, when they did the PPPFA, there was specific language in there that said it's up to the bank to decide if they're going to apply these new rules back to those old loans. And what I saw right now, actually I got one sent over to me today, was a bank officially notified the borrower that we are going to accept those terms under the PPPFA, even though your loan was made prior to June 5th. So
have you heard of ones that are saying no, that we're only going to do it for the loans that originated after June 5th?
I haven't heard of anyone saying no.
But it's a possibility. So it's something that we should have. Yeah, so we should be checking with our lenders to see what their interpretation is if we've not already received something from them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Have a discussion with your bank. If you haven't been notified, I would reach out to your lender and say, hey, are you going to allow me to apply the PPPFA provisions to my loan, yes or no?
Yeah.
I saw we had a question come in. Do you have that up there? I don't know.
Again, it takes a village sometimes. We have a chat. Yes, another chat came through. Can you reallocate your rent difference to another area like payroll if you use your PPP money before and stay under the % cap? Can you reallocate your rent difference?
So good question. Area? So I think what this would probably be getting at is if you're under the 24-week covered period, then you could go to a situation where you can use 100% of your payroll to apply for your loan forgiveness and not even have to worry about rent. But it's really those 8 week. It's going to be really hard in that 8 week unless you really ramped up your payroll in that 8 week period. But by having that 24-week period, that does give you some alternative of capturing that. But beware that in these calculations, that means you're going to have to maintain a certain payroll level for a longer period of time in order to get complete forgiveness. Meaning now you have to keep your payroll going all the way out to, at certain levels for 24 weeks versus that shorter period of 8 weeks.
Okay.
So yes, you can. You can't have more than 40% of non-payroll, but you can have 100% of your loan payroll and payroll related. So benefits, payroll taxes. Yep.
Cool.
That's all I had. Yeah.
That was a lot not bad for coming back from vacation 12 hours ago. And it's 2 o'clock right now. I'm going to take about 5-6 minutes to wrap up. David, I thank you for participating in today's town hall, just to kind of give it a different perspective. Diana and Matt, as always, like the conversations and the exploration of, moving the needle of information to everybody. But in closing, I do want to let you know is that we, at Arcwood, I'm going to open up another series. We're working on another series of information. And it's really just to kind of have a conversation around healthcare. Certainly we're coming into the fourth quarter. Everybody understands that healthcare is expensive. If anybody's had a private conversation with me, you know that I'm always frustrated with, the conversation where I show up at your office and I'm like, we have a 10% renewal this year. And we go through some market studies and some analysis. And, then I come back a couple weeks later and say, like, great news, now we're at 8%. And we've kind of become accustomed for this conversation of saying that that's okay. And, talking to our finance teams, our CFOs, and, understanding that, great, we have an now 8% increase. It's disproportionate to my large employers because the employees are probably capped on what they're paying. Or if it's not, and we're sharing it with them, then they have an 8% increase in their premiums, but potentially they got a 3.5% wage increase. And so there's an eroding effect. And everybody understands that. We've had multiple conversations. And so what we're doing is I'm going to put together kind of a 6-part series is probably the only word I can come up with. But it's really kind of hyper focusing on some different strategies that we can be taking as employers to help, bend that curve. Because forever and a day, we have to somehow come up with solutions. It's not happening on a national level. There's programs that are available from local levels. And I just think it's a conversation we need to have. Is it going to be right for every employer? Probably not. Is it going to be right for 10%? I don't know. It's kind of a conversation where we're looking at, the early adopters and the ones that are, standing in line to get the iPhone right when it's issued versus the ones like Kathy, who my wife, who I think is still on the call. I'm wagering she still has an iPhone 6. And then it's everywhere that's in between. But the conversation is, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the ideas. Let's talk about the delivery of healthcare. Are there some different programs that we can use? And then you, from a leadership perspective, have the opportunity to make a decision. It might be 2021, it might be 2025, but at least let's get the information out to everybody so that you can start making decisions and start learning of different tools that are available without disrupting care, because that's the biggest thing. We've coined a new word called underinsurance in our industry. And the reason why we now have a word called underinsurance is because one of the strategies that we've all employed, and it's just not here at Arcwood, it's, I'm on the ledge team of the Arizona Association of Health Underwriters, and we've got 350 guys like me in the membership, and it's the same conversation that we're all having at these roundtables. And it's, as the premiums go up, there's disproportionate sharing with the employer. We can't continue to do that. So then we increase the out-of-pocket exposure to the participants. And so now it's become unaffordable. If you look at most of the bankruptcies that are happening from healthcare and non-payment of bills, a lot of it is from individuals that actually have coverage. So we have to start having conversations on how we're going to start bending this curve and taking a different approach. And so this is going to be the 6-point series. They're each going to probably be lasting about an hour to maybe hour and a half. And my goal is to really have a conversation, showcase some different things, talk about it, have kind of open dialogue, depending upon how many folks want to join on. So look for these invitations as they come out, because I think it'll be something that, just at least from a knowledge perspective, is that we just want to make sure that we're sharing this with you. With that, I want to thank you again for your participation today. Next town hall is scheduled for the 28th, 2 weeks from today. Maybe we'll have a CARES, maybe not, but I know we're going to have enough information that we're going to help share with you. I know Diana and Matt and again, David, you've been willing to share some information as well. So we'll definitely have a town hall 2 weeks from now. If you have any questions, ping us. Our sequence is first name at arcwood.com, and then you got Matt's information up there. David, I realize I didn't put your information up there, so I apologize. So I'll route any questions through myself or Diana, because we certainly know how to get a hold of you. And with that, thanks everybody. I appreciate your time. Have a great week, and we'll talk soon.